As gamers, it is important that we differentiate difficulty and balance from one another. Difficulty has to come from the many challenges offered to players with differing skill levels. Balance, for all intents and purposes, has to be about making sure the gameplay facilitates how well the player is able to handle challenges at whatever difficulty the player chooses to play the game.
While the God of War Ascension Bros Before Hoes trophy controversy has been the bigger hot-button issue recently, I feel the more important issue is the difficulty patch for the Trial of Archimedes.
These last two console generations have seen increased focus on checkpoint systems and more gameplay accessibility for a variety of players. The reason being is that controller options have become increasingly complex and some games have to accommodate players with tutorials. And developers want to make sure players are able to access all the content without being restricted by unforgiving difficulties. Gamers, of course, have cried foul over the hand-holding in some games and the more than forgiving checkpoints. Yet reviewers sometimes criticize some games for having inconsistent checkpoints and too many tutorials. Checkpoints serve to give players incentive to keep playing so they can experience the entire game, and it's difficult for some gamers to understand that not everyone can handle complex controls in everything from shooters to action-adventure games. I'm not saying that every game has complex controls, but when gaming has gone from the simplistic controls of Super Mario in the 1980s to the point, shoot, and sprint covers like Gears of War, then we can't pretend that games haven't gotten more difficult to control for some players.
And while God of War games have intense gameplay at higher difficulties, as modern games, they still have forgiving checkpoints and complex yet intuitive controls for any player.
So why, after 5 God of War games, can't some players and reviewers, despite being given every advantage in modern gaming, handle an allegedly unbalanced difficult section in God of War Ascension? Well, it's possible that the past decade has molded many players into the comforts of modern gaming. For example, the first God of War was praised for its moderately difficult, intense, and satisfying gameplay, but I think many God of War fans, like me, can attest to the infuriating climb out of Underworld toward the end of the game. Looking back, that must have taken me several deaths, and almost half an hour of screaming at louder than normal decibels. But I prevailed, and after the game released, there was no controversy over the, I would say, questionable hit detection in the climb. The game was even marked down by reviewers for it. There were no petitions to Santa Monica Studio that created God of War about that section of the game. Gamers just sucked it up and beat the game as is.
Now, I'm all for patches to fix bugs and other problems for an otherwise stellar game, but just because a game can be updated and patched doesn't mean that developers have to use resources to make a game easier after its release.
There is a very fine line between gameplay accessibility and skill level. Yes, players will lose consistently in a game they've never played. That should still at least be a part of the experience carried over from games in the late 1980s and early 90s. Balance should not even factor into this when a game has already trained the player how to handle tougher challenges later in the game. And games in recent years have gotten much easier for players to complete. So just this once, can't gamers and reviewers just let some games get away with a very difficult section in a game? Just a glimmer of the times when gaming meant only the very few can complete a game to the end. I was never one of those players growing up, but the reason I appreciate a game franchise like God of War is because it gives me that sense of accomplishment for barely surviving long enough to get to the next checkpoint, or finishing off a boss.
Even if my skill level is nowhere near many gamers, I will actively speak out against difficulty patches. Maybe I'm just being an alarmist, but I feel this may set a terrible precedent for the future of gaming. Anyway, thanks for watching. Like or comment. If you like what you see and want to see more, subscribe. Until then, keep gaming.